Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intelligence Brief, where we give you the best of the things that we had this week so that you are able to keep up with everything, even if you happen to miss one of our shows. And there was a lot that's happening this week and a lot that continues to happen. And that's one of the things we love about Daniel Davis Deep Dive is that we get to bring you all the things that are going on and the context of what it means for you. Let's jump right off in here. First of all, we had Larry Johnson, Larry the Shirt Johnson, one of our faves on the show here, answered one of the big questions here. Can Israel win in its war against, well, really everybody with air power alone or primarily with air power? Until you go in on the ground, air power is a great tool. It's very helpful, but it does not solve anything.
This has been first the Army Air Corps and then later the Air Force fantasy since World War II. That all we got to do is just drop them bombs, man. That'll solve the problem. Just if we bomb them enough. And look, Israel's trying to do that in Gaza. They have bombed that place into oblivion. And the Palestinians have all given up, right? They've surrendered or they've died, they've gone away, and they've turned all that land over to Israel. No, just the opposite. They're still fighting. And, you know, there's a talk of the Zionist settlers going in to settle parts of northern Gaza. Good luck with that. You can go with what? Body armor and helmets? Because the notion that you can go in and bulldoze a place and then maybe build something doesn't mean that you've actually pacified it to the point that you're not going to have to live looking over your shoulder every 5 minutes, worrying about whether you're going to get a sniper or a bomb
unless they depopulate the place first, like they are physically in the process of doing in northern Gaza right now. We'll see how far that goes. That's been one of the alluring hopes for everybody. I remember in Desert Storm, where I fought my first combat operation with the 2nd United States Cavalry, when we fought in the Battle of 7-3 Easting in the northern part of Kuwait against the Republican Guard. We had the United States had bombed the Iraqi armor that was had occupied part of Kuwait for I can't remember the exact number of days, like 70 days or something like that, 60 days. I can't remember. It was a long time. Just relentless bombing. Basically, Iraq had no air defense, and so on average, about once every 10 hours for all of that time, they were subjected to air attacks from the Western coalition that was attacking at that time. And the idea was we were just going to go and kind of clean up and mop up or whatever. But when we actually got in on the ground, I was with the 2nd Armored Cavalry, was a tank regiment, a tank squadron. When we got actually to the battle, we found out that only a small portion of their tanks had actually been destroyed in the air, even though they had no air cover, no air defense, no anything. It was not that effective. And until you go in on the ground, you're not going to win. That has specific ramifications for what Israel's trying to do, because they're trying to accomplish what's militarily unattainable. And it's just not going to have a good end. Now, the Israelis have gone in heavy on the ground in both the Gaza Strip and in southern Lebanon right now. And we had a great show, on Friday. Yeah, on Friday. Go watch that. We had Alex from History Legends on, and he really gave a good detail of exactly what's been going on there and how difficult that is just on the ground itself. But then that's not the only fight that Israel has. They're also fighting against the Houthis in Yemen. They're fighting against Hamas in the West, in Gaza Strip. They're fighting against Palestinians in the West Bank, and they're fighting against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and they're also fighting against Iran, which itself could blow up any moment now. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. But the primary issue, especially if you're talking about the Houthis and Iran, all Israel can do is use air power. And the idea that they're going to win a war with just air power is just ridiculous. You see, when they've been going on the ground for now 13 months and counting in the Gaza Strip, and they still haven't pacified that area. Even though they have just almost wiped out all of the buildings in there, it's incredible the amount of damage that's been done, yet they haven't won the war there. The task has only begun. It's only 1 month old so far in the southern Lebanon area, and that is also extremely difficult going. And of course, they've got every advantage you can imagine, and they still can't win all that war, and they're suffering lots of casualties and continue to do so in both places. Now, then the situation with the Houthis, nobody's talking about invading Yemen. So then, what's the end state there? The Yemenis have already shown that they're willing to continue fighting. They've been doing it for a decade, more than a decade, so going back against Saudi Arabia in the past. They never quelled them, even though they had all kinds of unlimited air power and almost no air defense on the Houthi side, yet they're still fighting to this day, still sucking up American interceptor missiles, which we desperately need for our own national security, not to mention for Israel and the Ukraine side. There's no end state in there. And now then you have the same situation with what could be blowing up in Iran. And Israel can't, they don't even have the chance to invade Iran with troops. I mean, they're decisively engaged in what they got now. They can't take anything else on, but yet they've committed themselves to a course of action. And we had Doug on later in the week that kind of wonders, okay, well, if you're looking at all the things that Israel's doing and how much it's committed itself and these wars it's trying to win, and it only has a ground troop for like 2 of the 7 that's going on, what do they have in mind? Doug had an opinion.
The last play and the most important play that Mr. Netanyahu has is to bring us into the war on Israel's behalf against Iran. If you sit down privately with anybody in the White House right now, I think they will confide in you and say, we really don't want a war with Iran. I know that in the Department of Defense, the attitude at the highest levels is, we really don't want a war with Iran. They understand what that means, the consequences for our own economy, for the financial system, and also for the region, and the potential for bringing Russia into the equation. Or the Russians have thousands of people on the ground in Iran right now. They built up the air and missile defense apparatus as rapidly and effectively as they can, but they've also flooded lots of other technologies into the country, particularly missiles and weapons. So Iran is ready in a way that it has probably never been to deal with this Israeli attack.
And Doug, let me ask you,
will not exercise any restraint after Israel attacks them.
And listen, the issue with Iran, they don't want a war. They've never wanted a war. They don't want the one that they are involved with fighting right now, because it's been going back and forth. I mean, really, since April, when Israel first destroyed the embassy building, the Iranian embassy building in Syria, and the Iranian response after that, when Israel again attacked into their capital city and assassinated somebody, one of their guests at a presidential inauguration, all highly provocative. And then Iran responded from that. And then Israel has again launched another one. And now then, according to information that we got out, I think on Thursday, allegedly the Ayatollah has already given the authorization to strike back and hit Israel again. And this one is allegedly going to be more painful and somewhat larger. But even if it's, something commensurate with what's happening here, Israel has shown that they're not just going to be passive about it. So if Iran does anything else to Israel, they're going to respond. And right now, we're locked in that situation where both of them are trying to have a response, but maybe not have it explode into an all-out war. But there's no off-ramp. Nobody's willing to let that be enough. That whatever the last shot was, no one's willing to say, all right, we're satisfied, let's just stop this fighting. It just continues to go up. Every time Israel hits Iran, Iran fires back here. And now then we're waiting to find out, will Iran again respond to what Israel just did in the last round? And listen, Gary, if you could throw that headline up there, we could be waiting any time now. It could happen even this weekend potentially. Because apparently, and according to this information here, 3 Iranian officials familiar with war planning said Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini had instructed the National Security Council on Monday to prepare for an attack against Israel. Now, we don't know how big that would be. I've talked to a number of experts here recently, some former CIA folks, and they say that Iran almost has to do something, but they're going to again try and thread the needle. They're going to again try and say, maybe we can avoid this. But then you have to wonder, does Israel really want to avoid it? Do they really want to avoid threading the needle? Maybe that's what they're trying to get. They're trying to get Iran to strike back and hit something big that's painful. And then everybody will say, okay, well, now Israel has to respond. Because it's always that way, isn't it? It's always Israel has to respond to this. It's never Iran is going to respond to what Israel did. Because understand this, I don't care what your affiliation with Israel may be or how much you may love them. It is a fact, an absolute irrevocable fact that Israel made the first shot. They struck the completely illegal, unethical, and immoral shot to destroy an embassy compound in another country. Those are off limits for everybody. They violated that. Iran responded. Israel then did something else that we would never, under any circumstances, tolerate, ever. If some nation who had an opponent, and then when someone that we invited to a presidential inauguration assassinated somebody in our capital city of Washington, D.C. Can you even imagine something like that? Of course, we're going to respond immediately. Iran did. And then if now Israel then now actually attacks into your country, hits your missile production facilities, hits your air defense radars, etc., no nation on the planet is going to not respond. And you see, you're just in this continuing tit for tat, and it's going up the escalation ladder. And if we want this to a war, Israel's got to stop doing the escalation, because so far Israel has started all of them. It's so ironic, if not perverse, that so many in the Western media always talk about, well, Israel is this destabilizing force. They're all these things that they do in the region that's terrible, and yet who's actually doing these things? Who's actually spawning the attacks? It's coming from Israel first, and then Iran is responding in ways that they're trying to get this thing turned off. But it's just a matter of time, probably, until one side or the other in one of these escalation ladders goes and finally goes too far, and then now the whole thing could explode in our faces. And it just seems unlikely to me that the current U.S. government, or no matter who wins next time, either one of them would be able to stand on the side because of the pressure if Israel gets sucked into a really big, painful war. But that's what we need. That's what we should do. And in fact, on that topic there, we had Ambassador Chaz Freeman, who was talking about what may happen, and among some of these ideas that some people seem to have, that if we just hit Iran hard enough, they'll collapse.
I think it is a mistake to imagine that a 2,500-year-old culture that's been around in one form or another for that long is somehow going to get toppled by an external threat. Quite the contrary is likely to happen. Finally, I would note that the statement that Hezbollah does not have the capacity to mount a retaliation is belied by the fact that it is mounting a retaliation farther and farther into Israel, away from the border. And it may have its command and control system disrupted by the terrorist act of blowing up walkie-talkies and pagers and having its leadership murdered. But there's every indication that its structure is a decentralized one. The local commanders in southern Lebanon and elsewhere are able to carry on the fight effectively and are doing so. And I'd say finally that the Israelis claim they destroyed half of Hezbollah's missile force in their attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon. I don't think there's any reason to believe that at all.
And so far, we haven't seen it. Again, you can go back and look through our videos, and you can see that on Friday, we had Alex of History Lesson 2 gave a detailed examination of what is going on in the fight with Hezbollah. And you can also go on his channel and look at that video. And it lays out in really from October 1st to October 31st, the full month of October, how that conflict is going. And you can see the end state there is that there is a strip, a ragged, jagged strip along the border that Israel has cleared, but at a pretty high cost. It is stunning that I think the toll for the month of October for Israel was 42 killed in action and somewhere between 400 and 500 wounded. That is an enormous casualty count on top of everything that's already happened in their war against Hamas, and in terms of how much further they had to go. And now then you're even thinking about wanting to add another layer on top of that of an outright explosive war against Israel. Look, folks, those wars can't be won. It is beyond fantasy. It's foolhardiness to think that if you fire enough missiles at Iran, or if you take out their leader, even if you assassinate Ayatollah Khomeini, that somehow that the war is going to be over. It's not going to be over. You're pulling those people together. Many of the people in Iran have been against the Iranian regime and have been trying to find some way to overthrow it for a long time. This has the opposite effect. This is going to pull them together because it's a shared threat that the whole nation has. Bombs don't care about whether you're for or against the Ayatollah. If they land on you, they're going to kill you, and the whole nation is going to be at risk from that. And if anybody has this fantasy that if you take out the Ayatollah, that then the people are going to rise up and say, Thank you, Israel, for that wonderful gift, which is what Netanyahu said. I mean, you're on a fantasy, and you're committing to a course of action that has no rational chance of success and every probability of turning the region into a sea of flames and burning down all kinds of things and all kinds of people, harming American interests. That's not a good way to go. And it's something that the United States should avoid. We desperately need to find a backbone and find some political courage and some diplomatic courage and some just sheer leadership anywhere in America in a form of authority, and tell Israel, you go down that path, you are on your own. And we need to say the time has passed where we need to say that in the private, in the background. It's now time to say that in front of a camera and publicly. If you go down this path, if you choose to and start a war with Iran and it explodes in your face, you're on your own. It is not in America's interest. We will not get into a war on your behalf. It is not in America's interest to send our sons and daughters to die for something you chose and a war you expanded that should never have been expanded, that the other side tried to curtail and to keep from blowing into a full-scale war. So it would be bad for America. We should not do it. And I certainly hope that we don't. Now, that's not the only conflict we have to worry about. There's also a lot going on in the Russia-Ukraine war. And we had turned into one of my favorite shows here. We had Alex Mercurius from the Duran live with us from London, who was talking a lot about what's going on in that situation. And, well, watch this. What is going to be the dilemma for the West on that inevitable day when the Ukrainian army collapses?
We're going to have a situation where the Russians will move westwards. We don't know how far westward they intend to go or will go, but they will go there. And they will go there in force. They will go there as an extremely powerful army. And many people in Europe will be extremely worried about that. And if we're not prepared to negotiate, then the danger is, in fact, the certainty is that the hostility in Europe, the mutual suspicion, the fear will crystallize, and we will get into another situation like the one we had during the Cold War, where we had the Russians on the one side, we have the United States and its allies on the other. There's once again permanent tension in Europe. There's permanent instability in Eastern Europe because the Ukraine issue itself has not been resolved. With all of that uncertainty, the United States will have to send hundreds and hundreds of thousands of troops to Europe again, or could find itself obliged to do so. And of course, the alternative to that would be perhaps the United States eventually coming to some kind of deal. But if we wait for that time, all kinds of very dangerous and bad things could happen in the meantime. And of course, the situation in Europe itself would become very dangerous, very stressed. We would have to worry about war all the time in a way that we have not had the need to do for, 30 years now. And societies begin to remilitarize. All the suspicions and all the fears that go with that would come back.
There is so much negative and so much against keeping this war in Ukraine going. This war has been, the outcome has been determined long ago. The fundamentals that go into building national combat power from one side and the other have been clear for years, not just months, for years, that the Russian side has irrevocably and irretrievably the benefit and the superior positions over the Ukraine side. They're never going to get it. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the industrial capacity, and Russia has the nuclear weapons. So there's no way that Ukraine will ever win the war, period, point blank. So then what possible sense does it make to keep teetering around the edges and saying, well, maybe if we just keep doing this, Russia would be harmed. It'll be. We've had the U.S. Commander of the Central Forces has unequivocally said, no, Russia will end up in a stronger position. They're going to be stronger now than they would have been if we hadn't gone to war at all. Stronger than they were at the beginning. We always said that our objective was to weaken Russia. That didn't happen. We failed at that. We wanted Russia to lose. That didn't happen. We wanted Ukraine to win. That's never going to happen. Okay, 0 for 3 is pretty bad. Let's don't keep making it worse. And then, as Alexander talked about, the possibility of either A, getting dragged directly into it because somebody finally crosses an actual red line, and then the other side takes action on it. And then again, just like in the Middle East, it blows up, and now then we're sucked into a war that we never wanted or didn't choose. Or alternatively, that there's, sort of a new sort of a Cold War to where everybody's constantly worried about it blowing up into a hot war between NATO and Russia, which would include nuclear weapons. It would be a return to the worst part of the Cold War that we should never have had to fight. It should never happen at all. All we need to do is have a negotiated settlement on the best terms we can and tell Zelensky, that's it. You've had nearly 3 years of stuff. It never worked. There's not going to be any more. Make a deal. That's what we should do. I know that sounds harsh, but that's reality. That's actually for everyone's benefit. That will end the suffering and the bloodletting for the Ukraine side, in the destruction of their cities, and end the possibility for everybody getting sucked into a war. At this point, that is absolutely the best course of action that we can get into. And it's the only thing that makes any sense. And look, this idea that you can just keep giving more money and Ukraine will fight perpetually is not true. And let me show you this graphic that was posted by the New York Times here a couple of days ago that puts it in very, very graphic terms. What you see there is from, I believe it's November of 2022, all the way through this past month, through October. On the red there, you see that is territorial gains made by the Russian side. And on the bottom there, you see territorial gains made by the Ukraine side. And in late 2022 and in the middle part of 2023, they made a number of gains, but then they ended up losing them and sending it back. And then you see that from about October of 2023 forward, so now full 12 months, you see nothing but an unbroken line of Russian territorial gains. And you see the last 4 months in particular, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger every month. This last one represents 150 square kilometers. Actually, it's more like 160, actually. Every time you turn around, the Ukraine side is losing more and the Russian side is gaining more. And of course, commensurate with that is a huge number of casualties on the Ukraine side, casualties which cannot be replaced. They're not even able to force people into the war that to offset the losses. So it is inevitable, whether you want to have a negotiated settlement or not, the war is going to come to an end. And what we don't know, what I don't know, is that at some point the fabric of the army will shatter and break. It finally gets too brittle and too weak, and then all of a sudden it just breaks through like a dam. Some people think things happen in a linear fashion, and well, we see how long Russia has taken this land, but it'll just get smaller, 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 smaller. No, it could get to a point and then it just collapses. No one knows where that is. But why do we want to find out? Because for that to happen, that means more people have to die. More Ukrainian people have to be killed. And it's just absurd, obscene, and immoral for us to take a situation where all the factors and all the evidence scream this is lost. There is never going to be a victory plan for Ukraine to have. There's never going to be an outcome that's going to turn the tide of the war. That's fantasy. The facts are bloody and real. And it is time for us to do what makes sense, what's right, what's good for America, what's good for the people who are still alive in Ukraine, what we should have done 3 years ago so that there wouldn't have been a war. Can't do anything about the past. We can do something about where we are right now, and that's what needs to happen. And that is your intel brief for this week. Thank you very much for being with us. We're going to have another great set of shows for you next week. We always have a lot of good people coming on. Every time something's happened, you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to bring it to you as it's happening. And also, don't forget, we have our podcasts are now available. You can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, anywhere you get your podcast. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you will be shown to where we are. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.